So welcome everyone to Jefferson's original podcast series. As this is our first hurrah into the world of podcasts, for those of you who aren't familiar with Jefferson, we're a transformational consultancy that focuses on the marketing, communications and creative sectors and delivers services on the talent acquisition, growth strategy, M&A and wellbeing management. Throughout this series, we'll be discussing a number of topics ranging from advice on growth strategy, recruitment, how to prepare to sell your business, all the way through to diving into transformational shifts within organizations, the impact on employees, and of course, transformational coaching. Today, I'm your host, Tom Howe, and I'm lucky enough to be joined by Dr. Fiona Wilson. For those of you who don't know Fiona, Fiona is a specialist transformational coach and senior lecturer at London's top university for student experience. In her role, she's delivered the Master's Programme in Leadership, Innovation and Change Management and has been a massive asset for us over here at Jefferson. Today, we're going to discuss transformational coaching, as I'm going to assume that most may not have heard of transformational coaching, what's involved. We're also going to talk about the benefits to both the individuals and organizations, and also ask how these programs differ from others that are around. So look, let's just jump straight in. So a real easy one for you, Fiona, for the uninitiated. What is transformational coaching?
Hi, Tom. Thanks for having me today. So transformational coaching is the work that we deliver in our transformational coaching is really based around a rewiring of our responses to particular experiences. And therefore, it's about being able to rewire the way that we experience things within our professional and personal lives. So, for instance, someone may have a sort of crisis of confidence, perhaps with presenting, and what they would come to us about, say, this is happening, and this is part of what I do for a living, and what we would work with them on is, well, what's the emotion that's being pre-reflectively triggered, and the behaviour that then is subsequently happening. So if it's something like presenting, it's probably fear or shame, and we'd work with them to acknowledge that, accept it, but also to just see that it's just a perception, and that their behaviours that are then subsequently happening are really built around that perception of that experience and the emotion that they're having. Through just explicitly considering that, we'd work with them to be able to reconsider and rewire their response to presenting.
Okay, no, I love that. So talk me through perhaps in a little bit more detail if possible, the sort of the benefits of this type of coaching, and maybe walk me through some classic examples how it could be more relatable to our listeners.
So if we think about the fact that we go through life having lots of experiences and that we have a response to these, and that response is primarily, according to the theories that are informing this type of coaching, that response is primarily emotional, and then cognition kicks in the form of our imagination. What happens is that we have an experience, we have an emotional reaction to it, and then that forms over time into a belief about ourselves. So we might form that belief about presenting and say, well, I'm someone who can't present, I don't do presentations. We will literally talk about ourselves like that. And what we do is we become a self-fulfilling prophecy, because we get that feeling, so we make choices based on it. So we're like, well, I'm not doing that, I don't like that feeling, I'm going to come away from that. So what we work with someone and to help them to change that, to acknowledge that it was just a feeling, and then that it's just been a perception of that feeling, and then we've made that into a part of ourselves. We've done that. Therefore, we can undo it. And we can therefore allow for the possibility that maybe there'll be a different emotional response. And that takes a process of time and going through different activities and building up a new persona around that and allowing for new feelings. But that's the work that we would do within the coaching. So, I've worked with people who may have had a couple of decisions not work out. So they've, in business, they've had a couple of things, they've made decisions and it's not quite worked in their favour. And actually they've lost all of their confidence because of that, rather than seeing that these were just some things that didn't go the way they expected them to. They almost feel that they interpret it in a sense of shame, the feeling, and then they interpret that as being a sense of lack of self-worth and that they are bad at this. And we do this all the time. We tell ourselves we are one thing based on an experience. So suddenly they become someone who can't trust their own judgment, rather than someone who's had a couple of decisions that didn't go the way they predicted they would. That's all, not good or bad, but they predicted they would be. And so again, through explicit consideration of that emotion and the thinking that happens afterwards, or the imagination and how that kicks in, and really exploring that from a neuroscientific embodied perspective. So being able to see that this is a natural thing, this isn't something it's not something for us to be blaming ourselves about, it's not something else to get wrong. Then we're able to actually help someone to see, okay, well, maybe there is another way. Maybe I'm someone who just had a bad presentation, or I'm someone who had a decision not go the way that I wanted it to. And that isn't a part of my identity. So we work a lot around that sense of who I am, why I think I might be this, but that I can be something else.
I love it. So relatable, actually. I mean, you and I've gone through the journey ourselves. Obviously, you coaching me, so I can definitely see where that's benefited me. That's for sure. So look, in general, what do you find people's expectations are when it comes to coaching prior to completing the program, of course? But I know this can vary from country to country. But just as a general feel, what do you think people's perceptions are?
I think people's experiences of coaching are different. Some have had really positive experiences, particularly I think when people are developing in their careers. When they're perhaps I think that middle management type coaching where you're becoming a leader can be quite a positive experience. However, I think there's quite a lot of coaching out there that could be considered as performance management or instructional coaching. So really training, and actually performance management, someone else is setting the goals. And that's certainly not the coaching that we're delivering. So because the coachee needs to be in charge of that process, particularly for a transformational process to take place. So I think that's the biggest difference, is that a lot of people will have engaged with coaching where there may have been some targets set by leaders around them or colleagues, or where it's been actually to be trained in a way of being. So people might have had sales coaching, where I would say that's training, because actually what you're doing is you're being given a way to do something, but we're calling it coaching, and that's a sort of a way of making you sort of buy into it, and it's a way of managing that change, a successful way. But it's not this type of coaching where the decision about who you are, what you want to be, really lies with the coachee. It's really important ethically that that's the case in this type of coaching.
Okay, so in your experience then, why do you think people subscribe to this form of coaching compared to more, say, traditional methodologies? Now, and I word that carefully, because I know when I say to some of our clients when we started this journey several years ago that, and I talked about obviously wellbeing management and coaching, to our UK clients, there seems to be more of almost a hesitation to take it, and can be associated. I do think some people sometimes see it as a weakness, whereas obviously our US client base see it very much more as a strength and as an empowerment. But there is obviously variations of different types of coaching techniques. But in your experience and in your journey, why do you think people tend to subscribe more to this version than obviously, I say, other methodologies?
I think the fact that this is a holistic approach, because we're looking at this from a person-centered perspective, because this is about somebody's emotions and imagination and thinking, rather than an abstract external goal. So I think that's a key difference, that some people might initially it can feel quite a lot, can be quite overwhelming, the idea of doing that. And also I think there's a cultural sense, perhaps, in certain environments, that the work persona and personal persona are separated, that we have these different identities. I would say that that I've done a lot of research into identity, and that, it's written about hugely this idea of multiple identities. And I disagree, because I think fundamentally we all have a subjectivity that we bring to whatever our role is. So I think we go into different roles, but we're the same person. We bring forward different facets of ourselves. I'm not naive, but I think that underneath that, it's the same brain and body processing it. We've not got a different brain that we're putting on for work. So I think that I think it's being able to just be comfortable with that. I think that's important, and perhaps that's part of the cultural difference that you mentioned. But I think what's really important, and links to conversations we've had recently, is that a really good leader is leading people first. They are employees second. Therefore, the more that you can understand your own motivations and your own self, the better you are able to support others, because also the better you're able to look after yourself. So I think that's really important. I think leaders are expected to look after their employees from a holistic perspective now as well. And so I think if that's something that your role hasn't traditionally encompassed, or somebody now finds himself leading an organization with lots of people they didn't have before to look after, there I think it's a really important point to be able to look at things in this way and understand yourself within your professional identity. So I think that's really important. Hopefully that goes some way to answer what you said.
No, perfect, spot on. So something else I want to pick up on. So I know we've talked about this type of program being suitable. Obviously, we talked a lot about leaders and team leaders and business leaders. Obviously being empowered as a leader is important to understand obviously how you're at certain scenarios, and obviously to be a better team, to manage your team better. Would this type of program suit anybody, or is it just purely geared up to leadership positions?
No, I've worked with lots of different people over the years. So I've worked with 4-year-olds to 70-year-olds. So it's definitely
all leaders in their own right.
Yeah, it's definitely appropriate for everybody and anybody, because really it's about somebody exploring who they are and who they want to be, and helping them to be that person. So it doesn't matter. And really it's just about identifying things that you might want to develop, but also maybe, and not knowing what you want it to develop into, which is often the case that maybe earlier on in your career, you're not quite sure what that will look like. But that's the point of transformational coaching. You can work out what you look like. And actually, when we go, but even thinking about senior leaders, the process itself is a exploration. So we don't tend to set what the goal is, because that would be limited by where we are currently. We allow that goal to emerge as the process goes on.
Okay. So look, you mentioned earlier, and you said quite clearly that this isn't performance management.
Yeah.
How might this form of coaching though improve performance?
Well, I think it brings in sort of all the things that we've talked about. I think that the fact that if you are, as a person, more aware of yourself, not setting that self-sabotage in place, whether it's personally or professionally, then you're going to be better at what you do, because you're aware of your triggers, you're aware of what you're doing that's limiting you. I think that, coming to the point I just made about not knowing what B is, I think that's incredible, actually. For me, the most exciting part of the process, because it's limitless. This isn't about tinkering with where you are at point A and saying, well, B looks like A, but a bit better. This is about saying, currently, I'm limited by this belief I have about myself, where I believe I'm no good at this. I don't trust my decisions. Through this process, there's going to be a metamorphosis. And when I come out of it, I am going to be, there's no limit to what that could be. It's so freeing and exciting. And that process will decide what B looks like as we go through it. So the control will still be there for the person, because they're going to make choices. So to me, the performance enhancement side is it's huge. And I've worked with different people in different environments, including elite sport, and where performance is everything. So it's not that the performance isn't part of this. It's just that the performance isn't the focus of the coaching, the person is. Gotcha. And therefore the performance will improve because the person is engaged. That's what they want to happen. But the performance will improve beyond the person's imagination, because the imagination is limited by the shame or the fear that's currently controlling it. So what we do is we work on what we want B to look like in the process, throughout the coaching, and it evolves and becomes bigger and better, and it's an incredible process for someone. I had someone once say, the great thing about this kind of undertaking this work is that they were taken to places they didn't yet know existed, and that I think is really important.
Oh, okay, I love that. So, so would you say then is transformational coaching a business program or more personal than that? And if it is, does it also, if it bridges both sides, let's say, are the tools and techniques learned easy to apply in everyday situations? Because obviously these are quite intense programs, I'm assuming.
Well, I'm going to say not so much as intense as just because the process itself, because you have control over it. And you make the choices. So actually the pace is controlled by the person within it, but also it's an enjoyable process rather than, I think people get fearful, the idea of thinking about their emotions, thinking about their thoughts, that this is going to be like pulling on a thread and everything's going to unravel. Whereas actually this is an empowering and it's a freeing process. So actually you're really just clearing out things that you are getting in the way. The tools and techniques are really practical and can apply in both settings, personal and in business. And really importantly, it's sustainable. So the intention behind it is that somebody taking part in the program takes on the skills and the tools and techniques to be able to do this for themselves for the rest of their life. It's not about having to come back to it. It's not a codependent type process. It is absolutely for the coachee to be able to leave the sessions and be able to use and implement the tools again and again and again as they go through further subsequent changes in their life. So in that sense, it's a life skill program rather than a personal or a business.
Okay. So I know you and I've spoken in the past quite some depth actually about human emotion and typical trigger points that can cause automated responses. With this in mind, how easy is it to rewire emotions with a view to approaching certain challenges, perhaps with a different mindset?
So it's a simple process, but it takes time because you're literally rewiring yourself from the inside out. So the idea of the simple process is just really, it's about acknowledging it's happened so that you've had this emotional reaction and that this has informed your subsequent behavior. So the easiest way, and the way I like when I lecture on this, is I put three pictures up, one of a lift, one of a spider, and an escalator, because I don't like escalators. And I say, people have a visceral reaction to those things, and then they make decisions based on it. So it becomes ingrained. I think that's the point, is it becomes ingrained in our identity. So all we need to do is accept this was just a perception of a spider. It's just a perceived, it's fear, but it's then our imagination sends us in a particular place, to a terrible place. So once we've acknowledged that and we allow for the possibility that it could be something else, then it's about repeating that process and allowing and playing with different approaches to the spider so that we acknowledge that a different emotion can come up. It's also about allowing the feelings to be comfortable with that feeling of fear. And so there are elements that people will find potentially imagine are challenging. They're not in the actual process. It really is, again, the feedback from people I work with is that this is an enjoyable, it's a relaxed process. It's not counselling, and it's not, and it isn't. This is about so this doesn't involve reflection. So this doesn't involve the why and going into the why. This just acknowledging the what, really.
Yes.
And then moving forward. And just so, but people still, there is still the fact that you've got to build a new neural pathway in response to something, and that will take time. So but what you're doing by allowing for the possibility of another one is you're taking, so if we imagine the original neural pathway of fear of the spider, what we want to do is take the heat out of that and allow for the new one to form. So there's the saying of, neurons that fire together, wire together. And what you've got to do is get that going. And I would say neurons that play together stay together. So we also get playing with different ways of it, rather than setting ourselves up for failure, perhaps, by setting a really rigid targets for ourselves. So it's just, that does take some time, but it's not, so it's not an intense it's happening while we're getting on with our lives, because every time we encounter the spider, we're just allowing for the possibility of saying, well, actually, no, that wasn't, it wasn't, I don't have to be scared. The spider is, the size of my thumb. It's not the size of a house. So it is that process. And actually, once the initial fear is gone,
Yeah.
so once we process and allow that fear to pass, and we stop engaging with it and fighting it and going, I'm not frightened of spiders, but you are frightened of spiders, but I don't want to be. And we see that fear as a weakness. And actually, once we just accept it, once we just allow it, it takes the heat out of that automatic response, that embodied response, and it does allow for us to have a new one. So there are little parts of this process from a biological and neuroscientific perspective, and people engaged in the program, if they want to know more about that, I think brilliant, they can go off and they can read. I've got lots of readings people can do and things, but you don't have to. So but I think again, it's really important for me that people get a synopsis of that kind of scientific perspective, because it gives people a framework to go forward and take that forward for themselves, and understand the biology behind it. I find that reassuring, and I think everybody else, I think people do. They find, there's a biological framework for what's happening. Therefore, I can understand this.
Okay, so taking a step back from the individual, how might transformational coaching be applied when, say, managing change on an organizational level? Because we've talked about individuals, but now looking at it from a company perspective.
So when we look at going back to the previous response that I gave, a part of that is important to consider, and that is when I talked about the playing, part of the reason for doing that is because we like to be in something called homeostasis. So that's our sort of sense of safety. And on an organizational level, if you imagine managing change for a whole organization of people, every single one of them is going to respond, is going to do something, that they're going to feel a certain way when that change comes about. So their homeostasis is potentially going to be threatened by change. So it's understanding when we're looking at change on an organizational level that everybody's having a different response to the change. Some might be positive, some might be negative, that people's comfort zones are being shaken, and that comfort zone is important. So when we're looking to make a change, we're really looking to stretch the comfort zone rather than jump out of it, because that puts people into fight, flight or freeze. So at an organizational level, what you want to be doing is taking everybody with you in that change, and moving the goalposts of the comfort zone as you go, and helping people to understand that they have a roadmap for change. Because I also think that's important, whether it's individual or in an organization, that people have experienced change before. Therefore, they'll know how best they manage change or how they don't. And actually talking to people, again, this explicitly just acknowledging and being aware of how change happens and how people react to it, means that you can then help to bring everybody on, through the change. So if you have an open discussion with people, if you're bringing in a top-down piece of change, which is sometimes needed, and maybe Barbara in accounts, explicitly says, I've been through change before and I was made redundant. And so that's going to trigger a huge fear for Barbara. Yeah. And then you're able to have that conversation. Well, Barbara, that's not happening this time, but I understand that. Then suddenly all the communication you have will be open and effective. Whereas if Barbara doesn't say that and you don't say that, but Barbara passive aggressively then stops coming in on time, or forgets to answer emails and just has this fear response that's playing out, then that's going to have an impact on how that change is managed by her. So understanding that all of those people have that, and helping to bring them all into the process through just this awareness that everyone is having an emotional response to what you've proposed. Everybody's having an emotional response all of the time, and I guess at the heart of this work is removing that othering of emotions that can happen, especially I think in business, but also in sport where I've worked, where it's seen as something a weakness, or emotions are seen as something we control through our mindset, whereas emotions are as natural as breathing. What we really want to be able to manage effectively is our expression of them, and the best way to do that is to become comfortable with them and actually acknowledge them and make them part of the culture. So there's an element of a little shift there as well.
Okay, so these sessions, or maybe I should refer to them as programs even, are they one-offs, or are there a set number that people tend to or need or required to attend?
So we've come up with a kind of 6+ induction process or program here. really there needs to just be a beginning, a middle and an end. So the length of it can be different depending on what somebody is doing. But that just gives us a nice couple of sessions to identify and explore the current, to do a sort of audit. Then the work takes place, and that's when you're playing with different ways forward and you're starting to fire off the new neurons and build up that side of things. And then the last part of a program would be about autonomy. So how are you going to carry this forward, and looking at where you might use the tools and techniques in the future and things like that. So making sure someone feels comfortable with that. So I think, we've devised this program at this length for effectiveness, but it can be different. It can be longer and it can be shorter.
Okay, so how easy is it to call upon these lessons learned in these sessions? Are they practical?
Yeah, absolutely. So they are little things like the clearing is something I use a lot, and that's to sort of acknowledge or have that explicit awareness of the emotion, which can be really difficult when people have perhaps been turning away from them for a long time, or even for any of us. For me, and I, would say that I turn towards them a lot and talk about them a lot. But it's acknowledged. So the clearing is a little tool that I learned from anger management. It's used quite a lot in all different types of environments. And that's just a really practical tool to help you to identify your emotion and express it. So things like that you would then incorporate into your behaviours really on a daily basis. And some of the other things like the identity jigsaws that we do, you can use them as what's really nice, and something I do, and lots of people that I've introduced to this too, use it as a like a little sort of, how at New Year we might look at the year ahead. Well, I would do that more on a quarterly basis, just to say, right, where am I now? Where do I want to be in the next 6 months? What's going on for you? And you can do that with those different roles that you're in. So you could do a little exercise around where am I, a little audit of where am I, where do I want to be, how am I going to get there, what am I going to stop doing, what am I going to start doing, what does that look like? So they can do another big part of it, just to add in, is that we'll talk about how you like to move forward, because we're all different. So some people like to have really hard targets that they hold themselves account to. Others prefer to journal and paint and make it a much more of a creative process. So this isn't about how I might manage change when I'm working with someone. It's about how they manage change. And I think that's also really important. There's a lot of coaching. You spoke earlier about coaching that people might have encountered. There's quite a lot of models out there. And those models, and if people have put up books about things as well, that way will work for a certain percentage of the population because it aligns with their belief system. But if it doesn't, it just won't work. So part of my job is to also help someone for me to work out from them what their belief system is around knowledge and change. And then actually through them knowing that, they can manage their own change in the future, should they want to. I use the word change, but a lot of the time it's acceptance. And it's, so it's also sometimes it's not about, I've got to do this and I've got to do that. Sometimes it's more about, okay, this is okay, actually. And maybe it's about me stopping to resisting this and just accepting it.
Okay, so look, final question, I promise. Otherwise, I know that you and I could talk for hours about this one. But what would you say to someone who's thinking about engaging in a coaching program?
I just say, have a go. Just have a go. It's that it's such an enjoyable process, and it's led by you. You control this process, so there's nothing to be wary of. It's all about you. You get the chance to talk about you on a regular basis. Who doesn't want to do that? But also, who gets the chance to do that, really? And I'm being flippant, but genuinely, this is a space you control. You decide what is the focus. My job is just there to say, well, perhaps to give some insight into why things are happening from a scientific perspective. And also to ask questions of you, just, and perhaps bring in some of the tools and techniques that I have from the coaching, but also from my knowledge around leadership, change management, organizational culture. So I'm bringing to the table, lots of things that I can draw on, but really I am the resource for you to manage your own change program. I am just the resource that's there to help you.
No, I love it. I absolutely do. I see that obviously, as I say, we've gone through the journey before. You've coached me actually on and off over the years, so I can personally vouch for it. But I hope for the listeners that this session has actually been useful, at least if nothing else, giving you an insight into what transformational coaching is and what the benefits might be. If anybody would like to know more information, there'll be our contact details dotted around on the links below or through the recordings. Feel free to reach out to us at any time with any questions. Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed the podcast. Thanks again for your time, Fiona.
Thanks, Tom.
Cheers.